In court after an admitted killer is caught on camera smiling during his sentence.
Miguel Alvarez Flores, seen here waving, both face aggravated kidnapping and murder charges for allegedly killing a teenage girl during a satanic ritual.
February 16th, 2017. Two teenage members of the MS-13 gang mercilessly killed another teenage girl as part of a disturbing satanic ritual. While their reaction during their sentencing was rather unusual, what happened to them next changed the course of their lives forever. Here are the 10 youngest gang members reacting to life sentences. Number 10. Victor Rodas.
Victor Rodas is one of 6 people charged in connection to Raymond Wood's death.
The Lynchburg teenager, prosecutors say Victor Rodas and 4 others staged a drug deal with Raymond Wood in 2017.
On the outside, he might seem like a sweet little teenager, but deep down, this kid is a hardened criminal. March 27, 2017. A tragic incident occurred in Bedford County, Virginia, where a Lynchburg teen named Raymond Wood lost his life. The individual responsible for this crime was Victor Rodas, an alleged member of MS-13. At first, Rodas didn't appear to be someone capable of violence, but beneath the surface, he proved to be this dangerous individual, described as a humanized weapon of mass destruction, willing to commit murder without hesitation. Unfortunately, Raymond Wood became one of his victims. Before the fateful day of the murder, Rodas had initiated contact with Wood through social media, pretending to sell marijuana. However, this was all a trick to lure Wood to a secluded location where he would brutally be killed. When Wood arrived, he met Rodas and 4 other members of MS-13, and they forced him into a car, transporting him to another location where they subjected him to a vicious assault, stabbing him 27 times with a 19-inch knife. They also injured his hand and repeatedly slit his throat, callously disregarding his pleas for help. Rodas was eventually apprehended during a routine traffic stop, and incriminating evidence including Wood's bloodied shoes was discovered in the back of his car. In February 2019, Victor was sentenced to 55 years to life in prison, with 35 years for murder, 10 years for abduction, and another 10 for his involvement in the gang. When the judge pronounced his sentence, he appeared relatively composed and unaffected, perhaps indicating that the prospect of spending the remainder of his life incarcerated didn't trouble him. Number 9. David Parga.
A La Habra gang member was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison today for murdering a college student at a Halloween party back in 2006.
October 29, 2006. African-American Cal State Fullerton student Lilo Washington attended a Halloween house party hosted by the West Side La Habra gang along with his friends. Despite the party being hosted by this gang, it's important to note that Washington and some other attendees had no association with any gang. During the party, a dispute and physical altercation broke out amongst 2 women inside the house. Washington and his friends were asked to leave the party. However, they returned when the situation seemed to have calmed down, which Parga interpreted as a sign of disrespect to his gang. Subsequently, one of the gang members hosting the party, David Anthony Parga, approached Washington, who was standing outside the house and hadn't been involved in the argument or altercation. Tragically, Parga fatally shot Washington 4 times with a .22 cal pistol. After the shooting, Parga instructed Washington's friends to take him far away from the house and warned him not to contact 911. Instead, they took Washington to the nearby police station, just a few blocks away. From there, he was taken to a hospital but sadly succumbed to his internal bleeding. Subsequently, Parga was arrested, as his DNA was found on the shell casing at the shooting scene. Additionally, a female witness testified that she had helped dispose of Parga's blood-stained clothes. It's important to note here that Washington was pursuing a double major in business administration and accounting, and was only a semester away from graduation at the time of his tragic death. 8 years after the incident, Parga stood trial for Washington's murder. He made the unwise decision to represent himself in court, which ultimately worked against him. The presiding judge, just before delivering the sentence, described Parga's actions as a senseless and extremely foolish killing of a man with a promising future. After the sentence was announced, Parga specifically turned to Washington's mother, believing that she didn't harbor ill will towards him, unlike the rest of the family. Number 8. Brandon Spencer. You can tell he was pretty frustrated with the judge handing him a 40 to life sentence for a gang-related shooting. I mean, who wouldn't be? However, Spencer's reaction can be justified when you get to hear the real story behind the supposed crime he committed. October 2012, 18-year-old Spencer and his girlfriend, Jennifer Moore, bought tickets to a Halloween party in Hollywood. But on their way there, they heard news of a shooting that had claimed 3 lives, so they decided to go to another party at the University of Southern California. When they got there, they met a crowd of people waiting to enter a ballroom at the center of campus. Then out of nowhere, shots rang out. A couple of bodies fell to the ground while everyone else scrambled to leave this crowded place. Police in the vicinity tried to get a grip of the situation and in the process grabbed Spencer as the shooter. One of the victims of the shooting, Gino Hall, is a known opposition of Spencer's. Gino was a Crenshaw High School football standout and was also a member of the Crips. He was known to engage in heated trash talks with Spencer over Twitter, while Spencer, on the other hand, was identified as a member of the Bloods. And if you're wondering, well, yeah, Spencer was actually the shooter, but he only shot at Gino Hall in retaliation for Hall attacking him a year before at another party within their neighborhood. Subsequently, 3 other partygoers were hit and Spencer was charged with 4 counts of attempted first-degree murder. And now you know he was handed a 40-year sentence. But did he really deserve it? Some claims are making their way around on the internet saying that Spencer wasn't actually the shooter. He was known as a nice guy who didn't have the balls to even hurt a bird, let alone yield a gun. And although he might have affiliations with the Bloods, it didn't take away from the fact that he was a good kid, working as a security guard to feed himself. Sadly, all that didn't stop the jury from finding him guilty. As Judge Edmund W. Clark Jr. handed down the sentence of 40 years to life, Spencer's face twisted to a frown. You can just see the pain in that expression. Seated with his hands cuffed behind his back, he smacked his forehead twice on the table, and then he shouted, "I'm sorry for what happened, Your Honor, but I can't do life in prison." Some members of the public are arguing the sentence was too harsh, given that no one was killed, and in reality, he was actually handed the minimum sentence. Plus, Spencer was also convicted of gang activity after his cell phone was found to contain photos of him throwing blood signs, showing off a gang tattoo, and holding a gun. But the judge dismissed these charges, so the sentence might have looked harsh, but it was fair. And who knows, with good behavior, he could be out in a couple of years. Number 7. Danta Wright.
I just want to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. R.I.P. Keon, I love my family.
That's all you got to do.
And those were some unremorseful words coming from Danta Wright during his sentencing for a murder charge. 3 p.m., October 4th, 2016. A maintenance worker on shift at an apartment complex in Michigan was working inside this building. However, at some point during the day, he walked outside and found an unresponsive young man laying on the ground. He ran over to this body and quickly noticed a pool of blood surrounding his upper body, with a single gunshot right in the middle of his forehead. It became obvious that this boy had been shot and killed, but who exactly was he? The victim was 18-year-old Jordan Klee. Jordan lived with his mother, Karen, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He planned to go to college at Michigan University and also planned to join their football team. Unfortunately, this poor soul never made it to his high school graduation. The police interrogated the maintenance worker and other staff, but they all claimed to have seen nothing. However, 3 people did report that they heard a loud sound that could have been a gunshot. About an hour before Jordan's lifeless body was found, his family was immediately informed. But aside from the feeling of sadness and devastation, they were also confused, as Jordan was supposed to be at school that very day. They had never heard of the apartment complex where he was shot at. So how did he get there? Well, Danta Wright and 2 other teenagers, simply identified as Ellison and Gracie, are members of a small gang operating in Michigan. They met Jordan on a walkway before attempting to rob him of his clothes and shoes. But when things went south, Wright pulled out his gun and shot Jordan in the head. One thing led to another, and authorities apprehended all 3 teenagers connected to this murder. Wright waived his right to a trial after pleading guilty to armed robbery, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, felony, firearm, and second-degree murder. He took a plea deal and was expected to receive the minimum sentence for each charge. And he almost blew this deal away by smiling in court while Jordan's mother's speech was read out. The judge was so pissed off by his lack of remorse that he would ask prosecutors if they would consider taking him to trial to face a stiffer punishment if found guilty.
I'm very tempted to just say, I'm not going to accept this sentence agreement. We'll go to trial, and if you're convicted of felony murder, you'll go to prison for the rest of your life. That means you'll die there.
To his luck, the Klee family didn't want to move forward with the trial, leaving Danta Wright with a 25 to 52-year sentence and a sheepish smile on his face. Number 6. Lil Tony Smack.
Criminal career started at age 15, and he would not have stopped. With life in prison now,
Two young boys, part of the 8-Tray Gangsta Crips, committed a crime so heinous, it had a significant impact on the entire state of North Carolina. And don't get us wrong, we're not trying to sensationalize this story, but it did make news headlines because one perpetrator, Antonio Nathaniel Davenport Jr., aka Lil Tony, was a well-known rapper in the state. In his songs, he would glorify his gang's activities and depicted graphic scenes in his music videos. But Lil Tony and his associate were also involved in drug trafficking, bank fraud, and intimidating locals in their community. However, their criminal activities caught up with them when they committed the devastating murder that landed Lil Tony locked up for life. August 14, 2019, rival gang members assaulted Lil Tony on Durham Street and proceeded to post a video of the assault online, taunting him and his gang. This tarnished their reputation and they would seek revenge. Lil Tony conspired with a fellow 8-Tray Gangsta Crips member, Derek Dixon, known as Smack, and a few other members, to carry out a drive-by shooting on those who had attacked him. After engaging online in a feud with their enemies, Lil Tony Smack and their associates drove to a spot in North Durham, frequented by their rivals. Lil Tony had a 9mm and Smack had a .40 caliber weapon. They positioned themselves in the van, waiting for the right moment to carry out the drive-by. Around that same time, Zion was in his aunt's car with 4 other children, on their way to get snow cones. Tragically, when Lil Tony and Smack executed their plan, they mistakenly identified Zion's aunt's car as belonging to a rival gang member. They fired 22 shots into this car, tragically killing Zion and injuring his cousins. What's particularly astonishing in this story is that Lil Tony was wearing an ankle monitor due to this pending domestic violence charge he was facing. We kind of find it hard to believe how reckless you need to be to commit a murder while wearing such a device. And as you might have guessed, data from his ankle monitor placed him at that scene and at Smack's house just minutes before the murder. CCTV at a middle school also recorded Lil Tony's Honda following the SUV Zion was in. It was evident that these two were involved in the crime, and they were arrested a few days later. May 11th, 2021, Smack pled guilty to the charges against him, while Lil Tony was found guilty of murder by a jury. During their court proceedings, Smack appeared remorseful for his actions, but Lil Tony, on the other hand, seemed indifferent. In one hearing, he even spat at a worker and had to be removed from the courtroom, but ultimately, both of them received life sentences. Number 5. Carpio Brothers.
Anthony and Michael Carpio sat expressionless in court today.
Just like we've seen with the other criminals, the Carpio brothers, well-known gang members, showed no emotions as the judge handed them a life imprisonment sentence for their involvement in the brutal murder of 18-year-old student Kevin Orellana. April 24, 2013. This tragic incident unfolded outside Cleveland High School. Orellana had an altercation with Michael Stephen Carpio and Anthony Carpio, popularly known as the Carpio Brothers, while playing handball. They attempted to bully him off the court, and he bravely stood his ground. However, before he could react, one of them punched him in his face, while the other repeatedly stabbed him with a pocket knife. Witnesses saw the two attackers flee to a waiting minivan driven by this young woman. In the course of this investigation, the police utilized social media and other known ways to identify the getaway driver, 21-year-old Michelle Pineda. While she was suspected of being affiliated with the Carpio brothers, there was insufficient evidence firmly establishing her involvement. In the end, the Carpio brothers were convicted, receiving a sentence of 15 years to life for one count of second-degree murder. On the other hand, Michelle received a 2-year sentence in county jail after pleading no contest to one felony count of being an accessory. During the brothers' sentencing, Orellana's parents conveyed their heart-wrenching feelings in a letter read in court. As parents, we had plans to dance at his wedding, celebrate his promotions, and look forward to the possibility of grandchildren. We never imagined that we would have to plan his funeral. These words seem to have no impact on the Carpio brothers. Like many others, Orellana's parents hope that they spend the rest of their lives confined behind bars. Number 4. Martiz Fuller.
The court orders that on count 1, you are sentenced to life in prison without eligibility for extended supervision.
Unremorseful and unbothered was the reaction of Martiz Fuller, being sentenced to life imprisonment for the brutal killing of his ex-girlfriend back in high school. But the most shocking of all was the reason why he committed this crime. The girlfriend in question, Kaylee Juga lived with her parents in their Kenosha home in Wisconsin. She was a known cheerleader and honors student at Bradford High School with plans to attend college and one day pursue a career in the medical field. On the flip was Fuller, who was just 15 years old at the time, attending the same school as Kaylee, and was a quarterback on the football team. And just like every high school romance story, these two began dating, but it was only a recipe for disaster. He became very controlling of Kaylee, and things quickly turned violent. He would assault her on many occasions, both sexually and physically. At this point, they had only been dating for about 10 months, but Kaylee couldn't take it anymore. She decided to end that little romantic relationship, and that's when her nightmares came true. Fuller started stalking her to work in school, and despite her pleas for him to back off, it only got worse. Left with no other option, Kaylee reported him to the school authorities, and Fuller got himself expelled. It was at this point he went completely bonkers. He would lose his education, also the supposed love of his life, and was seen as a loser on social media. So feeling now that he had nothing to lose, he began plotting Kaylee's murder. May 9th, 2019, Kaylee and her 39-year-old mother, Stephanie Juga, were at home. Kaylee had just began feeling safe again after months of harassment and stalking from Fuller. She was in her room, listening to music, while her mother was doing household chores. Fuller, on the other hand, convinced a friend to drop him off 10 blocks away from her home, while he got on his bike and rode to her front porch. He then snuck into the house, through the open garage, and went straight into her room. Immediately, he pulled out his gun and brutally shot her 5 times. All Kaylee's mom heard was a loud scream from her daughter, followed by gunshots. She rushed to see what was going on, but met Fuller, standing in the doorway, with his gun pointed towards her. She begged him not to shoot, but he did, firing shots hitting her arm as she scrambled to lock herself in a closet. When she was able to, she called 911 while Fuller fled the scene. 3 p.m. later that day, Fuller turned himself in, reporting the crime to his cousin, who was a federal attorney. He was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, and burglary while armed with a dangerous weapon. Unfortunately, Kaylee was pronounced dead on scene, while her mother only survived by a miracle and a few donations from people to foot that medical bill. During his sentencing, this boy didn't show any emotions and even appeared sleepy. But later that year, Martiz was found guilty and was charged as an adult. At the age of only 17, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And showing such a lack of remorse during his trial, the judge presiding over the case was forced to say this:
You have not shown any attempts to acknowledge your wrong or express remorse in your actions. You are a very dangerous and a damaged human being.
Number 3. Miguel Alvarez Flores and Diego Hernandez Rivera.
Houston police providing an update on 2 young men accused of murdering a teenager as part of a satanic ritual.
February 16, 2017. 2 teens, part of the MS-13 gang, killed another teenage girl as part of a disturbing satanic ritual. The victim, Genesis Cornejo Alvarado, was born and raised in NYC, with her family having recently moved to Houston. Miguel and Diego were illegal immigrants in the U.S. and were also members of the deadly MS-13 gang. A month before they committed this crime, a girl whose name had been concealed for security purposes claims to have witnessed the entire tragedy that befell Genesis before her death. According to this girl, she met 2 men from El Salvador at an apartment on Glenmont in southwest Houston. She was on her way to school, but immediately these men spotted her, abducted her, and took her to a Glenmont apartment where she was sexually assaulted for 4 days straight. Once they were done, they moved her to another apartment complex with about 6 MS-13 members and a bunch of other abducted young girls, one of whom was Genesis. These gangsters forced these girls to ingest large volumes of drugs and alcohol, keeping them intoxicated the entire time. After about 14 days of gruesome torture, these gangsters brought out their shrine to make a sacrifice to the devil, but in turn Genesis condemned their beliefs in anger. That triggered every single one of them. And as Alvarez Flores, one of the men eventually charged for her murder, tried offering a lit cigarette to a satanic statue as an offering, the MS-13 group leader, identified as Diabolical, told the gang members that the beast didn't want a material offering. He wanted a soul. When the teen awoke the next morning, Genesis was gone. She had been taken to a sidewalk where she was shot in the head and chest. Police found her body the same day, but it was identified by her family nearly a month later. The girl who witnessed the entire tragedy was able to escape and eventually led police back to that apartment where she was kept. There, 2 victims in question were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But it wouldn't end here. During their arraignment, they both waved and smiled at the cameras like it was some type of TV commercial. I mean, just look at them. But their ridiculous smile was wiped off their faces after they both received 40 years in prison, with Hernandez getting 12 more years for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Number 2. Lee Rios. February 2018. 2 Latin gang members in Texas were found guilty in the 2015 murder of a man from Metro Atlanta. And like many stories we've talked about so far in the video, this was just another tale of a pointless and mindless murder. May 1st, 2017, when it all started with Vincent Cruz, a 44-year-old resident of Austell, mysteriously vanished after a Craigslist meeting regarding his car. The news of his unknown whereabouts were spread on May 1st of that said year, and concerns deepened as time passed. Eventually, on May 22nd, 2015, authorities discovered his lifeless body in the bushes. At that point, everyone wanted to know what happened to Mr. Cruz. After months of intense investigation, the FBI disclosed that a man named Gilbert George Morin had a connection with his death. They would also find a connection with another man, Lee Rios. But what set Lee apart from Gilbert was the fact that Lee was actually the leader of a small Latin street gang that operated in Texas. It was then that Rios revealed his encounter and eventual killing of Cruz, stemming from a drug deal gone wrong. During their meeting, Cruz brought a friend along with him, but later instructed that friend to leave, explaining that the potential buyer, which was Lee Rios, would need some time to inspect the truck. He assured her he would contact her afterward, but that call never came. The missing vehicle was eventually found abandoned in a motel parking lot, with the disturbing discovery of blood inside. Cruz's blood. Rios refused to divulge the information of what transpired that day, and why exactly he killed Cruz. But one thing was certain, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During his sentencing, he would keep a straight face, showing no signs of emotion. After that sentence was read out, he cooperated with deputies, walking out of the courtroom, and never would see the light of day again. And number 1. Shandell Jackson and Derek J. Thomas.
A violent outburst in a Milwaukee courtroom as a man fights with deputies following a life sentence.
September 2009. Nathan Potter, a film student from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, found himself in the worst situation anyone could find themselves in. It all began on a fateful night when Potter was walking to his apartment on Duzman Street in the Green Bay area. He met a young man named Derek J. Thomas and his accomplice, Shandell Jackson, as they approached from the other side of the road. Then, in this quick turn of events, Derek charged towards Potter in an attempt to rob him. But Potter had nothing valuable on him that night. With nothing to steal, Jackson, in a bit of a rage, pulled out his .45 cal handgun and shot innocent Potter in the head. As crazy as that sounds, the full story's a bit more complicated. Thomas was acting out as a lookout for Jackson during the incident, told the cops that he and Jackson had met up the day before, with their intention being to rob people, since Jackson needed money and had a gun in his possession. As they were scouting a tavern on Duzman Street, they spotted Nathan at around 1 a.m., and subsequent events unfolded. Now, if you're wondering what happened afterward, well, after the crime, they made their escape to Thomas's residence on North Pierce Street, where they spent their time playing video games and acting like they didn't just kill a human being a few hours ago. By the next morning, the news of Nathan's death was all over the area, and both teenagers would try running out of town. To keep a long story short, they were apprehended. Now here's the crazy part. In a separate incident, Jackson had previously been charged with a non-fatal shooting in the Holton Street area the same day he shot and killed Nathan Potter. It was related to a dispute, and he was charged with second-degree recklessly endangering safety, carrying a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. Adding a new murder charge meant the odds of Jackson spending the rest of his life behind bars were at an all-time high. During this sentencing, the once tough Jackson could be seen struggling with deputies, while his family shouted and wailed in the background. Nathan Potter's mother, Denise Potter, expressed her relief upon hearing about Derek J. Thomas and Jackson's arrest. She dispelled any doubts about the motive, stating that Nathan was a good person who would have willingly handed over his belongings if asked, but he had no money on him that night. And these guys had no reason to kill him. It's a pretty sick and twisted world we live in, where for no apparent reason, good people can suffer unimaginable harm.